developers, writers, and everyone who loves game design.
Welcome to DLC Not Included, our weekly podcast where we discuss game development, the industry, and everything in between.
We are your hosts, Steele
and Teal. Glad you could join us.
So this is the
penultimate
episode of Season 2 of our podcast.
And this has been exciting.
Yes. This season has focused on not being a developer, but the actual development of your game.
Right.
And we promise if you show up next weekend, you're going to get for our episode 20 of Season 2 a hell of an episode. Something that we have alluded to but never fully talked about. There's your teaser. It is a gorgeous day down here in H-Town. It's very windy. Hopefully the power will keep, but it's very relaxing.
Yes, it is.
And
it's just the kind of day you want to get out and do something.
Absolutely. Instead of being stuck online, which is kind of a lead-in, flunky as it is, to our topic today.
Okay, today's topic is online game considerations.
Right. So if you're going to have any online component to your game at all, that's what this is. This is a high-level conversation of that. The last part, we are going to go more into technical aspects, but this is assuming that you are considering any kind of online component. So, I guess we'll just jump into why.
Right. I mean, the basic thing is you want to ask yourself, why have an online component to your game?
Right. A lot of you listening may very well be asking that question. Why is Studio Bling bringing this up? Why would I want my offline game, my epic RPG? Why would I like my, deeply story-rich visual novel? Why would I want that to have an online component? Well,
we have been talking about this in other avenues, other venues, that the world is more online than ever before.
It really is, Teal. We were back in the 90s, early to mid-90s. The internet was a very new place. You had like the Mosaic web browser, and that was built off the old bulletin boards where you dialed into one server.
Right.
And over the past 30 years, it has just grown into the global village, as they used to call it.
Right.
But we're so connected now that it's almost at this point becoming a prerequisite in the minds, especially in the younger generations, that everything they do, including their entertainment, have some sort of online component. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a social component, although a lot of younger people do equate the two being the same. Not the case.
Well, because a majority of players today enjoy having connectivity with other players.
Indeed, they do. They do. I mean, even if you want to play a game by yourself, you don't want to be isolated. This is not everybody, but this is most people. For example, let's say you're playing a game like, Mass Effect. You may not be able to play Mass Effect with other people, but you want to connect with other Mass Effect players. It's the same thing of when you went to a theater to watch Back to the Future Part 1 or 2 or whatever, and then you go over to the soda shop, man, I'm old, and have a conversation with your friends about how cool the movie was.
Yeah.
That kind of desire to have some kind of connectivity with people that share interests have always existed, and now that online gaming is a thing, now that video games are a part of our society.
They are, and it's great how they've integrated.
Yeah. So people
just
are now,
saying that.
So it's the same mindset.
And online doesn't have to mean PvP or co-op.
Right.
It doesn't have to be that.
Right. So that's kind of dispelling the myth of where we could have gone with this.
Right.
Just because we're saying an online component to a game, that doesn't mean you're saying make your game PvP, make it co-op, make it co-play. No, not at all.
No, we're not saying that.
No, you're going to want to think of it in terms of how the online world can enhance the UX.
Yeah. That's pretty much how you want to look at this. You can always, of course, give the option to be offline. Yep. Okay, like I can think of Phasmophobia has a single player mode.
Right. That you can go click single player at the lobby. So I mean, because you're going to have your players who are going to be pretty much, I'm not interested in doing anything online.
That's cool.
Or I can't because I live in a very remote area and my connection is, just one step above 4800 baud.
Yeah.
I mean, I got this terrible connection. I know, right?
Right.
You know, my X modem is choking my Kermit. So, but all jokes aside, you're going to have people who are just going to say, I'm not interested. So, yeah, you can always have an offline component.
Absolutely. And you should. You should offer as much choice to your players as is feasible to put in your game.
And in the inverse to that, there's nothing wrong with saying that your game is offline, and that's it.
Sure. Yeah. This game, that you're making is your vision.
Right. So if we go through all of this today and you go, I can't really imagine anything like that, and you brainstorm and try to think of a way your game could have an online component, and you just can't, then don't worry about it. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with having a game that boots up as its own executable and does nothing else other than be a game.
Well, let's talk about the different types of online components.
Yes.
Because I'm sure some people are sitting here going, well, what could I do, you know?
Right, and this is by no means an exhaustive list.
No, but these are just examples.
And we're still being very high level here, guys. So, you know, when we say something like leaderboards, we're not necessarily just saying like the leaderboard you'd have at an Overwatch tournament or League of Legends tournament. We just mean some kind of way of comparing achievements. You know, and technically Steam does that. Technically with Steam, you can look at your achievements and you can see what other people have, and you can ask. Like, I can be on a game and I can say, oh, hey, Teal, I just unlocked an achievement. And Teal can be like, oh, I unlocked it yesterday.
Yeah.
So that is a form of leaderboard. A leaderboard is a way of comparing. And honestly, that's one of the easiest ways right there.
Yeah, another way that has really come into the forefront, I think, in recent years is trading game assets, like your Pokemon swapping.
Well, you could say that you could give the argument that was back in the 90s, back when Pokemon Blue and Red required two people to hook up their Game Boy. So, you know, it is something that's been around for a very long time, but has become, like, in vogue. Yeah. It's become a understandable feature that if you have a game with a social aspect, you should be able to trade your assets.
Yeah.
You know, whether it be an equal trade, or a trade for in-game currency or things like that. In fact, in-game economies. That is a way in which you can have an online component.
Very easily.
Yeah, a game market. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be real-world money. It could be like, you know, you mine coins. Like, literally like Minecraft, you get coins.
Yeah.
In your game. And you can trade that for stuff with other people. You know, kind of like how the markets and guilds worked when we were in ESO.
That's right, yes. You could go in and you could participate in the auction.
Right.
Or you could offer up things for sale to other players.
Exactly. So, you know, from both a trading standpoint and a buy and sell standpoint, you know, we are a consumer-based society. Heck, our civilizations were based on things like trading.
That's true.
I mean, money didn't have a thing back in the day, so people would trade. Here's sheep for wood, you know. There's that little bit.
Bad example.
Bad example.
No, I said that example.
That example, yes, for you Settlers of Catan fiends out there.
But let's dial it back and talk about the social aspect of gaming.
Yes.
You can have a social network in your game.
Yeah.
Where people can chat with each other, they can share photos and videos that they took of their game experience.
They can stream what they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like we stream from VR chat. So, I mean, you can do all of that to where your interactions with other people are something that you share with the world. A lot of apps nowadays, a lot of games allow you to connect to like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. So you could be in the game and go, oh, that's a really cool picture. You press a button, it fires off a macro.
Yeah.
And boom, it just posts to Facebook. Hey, look, here I am playing this game and I did this thing. Facebook games, didn't they used to actually post your achievements to your wall live?
They did.
Yeah, things like that.
They did. I think they still do. I haven't been on Facebook in a while, so I couldn't tell you exactly.
Me neither. But the social networking aspect, the social aspect of games are huge. And I think when we kind of dive a little deeper, we can use that as one of our biggest for instances. Because everyone out there, you know, all you all listening live, VOD, etc., you're probably thinking in your head, now that's more what I would want to do in my game. You know, I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth, but, you know, not everyone's going to go, I want an in-game market.
True.
Or an in-game auction house. Or I want to be able to do Pokemon trading. Not everybody wants to be able to do that in their game, but it's more common for someone to say, hey, I want player A to be able to interact with player B.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing.
And that's it.
Yeah. So the social networks that we're talking about can get pretty in-depth, up into including what we call life simulation. Where you're another person.
Ah, yes.
Be the other you.
I can be the other me.
Yeah. So, you would take your social networking, and that's, hey, we're all friends, and we're all sitting around talking, and we're playing shuffleboard. Well...
Shuffleboard.
Apparently, I'm just going to make all the old jokes today. But then life simulation takes it a step further to where you, your friends, your loved ones are in this other life that you're living online. A really good example of an online game that does that is Final Fantasy XIV, where people take a life on of their own with their tunes, they call them.
Mm-hmm.
They have their guilds, they have homes, some people get married, and even the friends that we have, some associate this character in Final Fantasy XIV with their other self.
Yeah.
And VR chat users can do that too. You'll have a VR chat user who's part of a furry community.
Yeah.
And he'll have a persona, which is his primary persona.
Mm-hmm.
And when they log on, they're that person. So they've taken the social aspect and brought it to a new level where that's another life for them, where they can escape the real world and enjoy it. So, but all that's online.
Yeah, it's all online.
None of that is an offline component.
You mentioned in your example of reaching out and being connecting with others, and I want to take that a step further and say, how about outreach?
Ah, yeah.
Like you could help somebody else in some way.
Okay, like.
Okay, for example, someone who is sad, who says, I'm sad about something.
Yeah.
You could outreach to them and say, how are you doing?
Yeah.
What's happening?
Yeah.
And we do that a lot.
We do that
at Studio Blue.
Studio Blue does that a lot. And another thing that Studio Blue does that could be done on the outreach concept, the outreach umbrella, is teaching something. That's what we do.
That's what we do. We teach. So you could certainly incorporate that component into your game. Let's say that your game takes place in the Roman times.
Okay, Roman time.
So you could teach a little something about that, about the things that the Romans did to your players, like constructing the aqueduct.
Right, or how the Senate worked, or the movement of legion troops, the legionnaires versus the Visigoths, for example. Or you can even make it more personal with that outreach and that education. You could even have it be that your game has built into its logic, its online logic, that seasoned players, veteran players, have the ability to go in and help new players play the game.
Ah, that's a great outreach.
And they're incentivized. They're given something for doing it. So at that point, you have a community of people who want to help new players. They get something out of it, as well as the satisfaction of helping a new player. And there are games that we've seen that are like that, where veteran players are by default helpful to new players instead of toxic.
Yeah.
Well, you can make that part of the actual framework of the game, which would be awesome.
Yes, it would.
We had a very good experience when we first started playing 7 Days, of having seasoned players tell us exactly how to play. So, it does help if you make that part of the overall design.
Yes. You're fostering a culture of helpfulness.
Yes. Now, you can always default back to the usuals. You can always default to PvP, because PvP is a thing that's never going to go away. As long as there's an online game, player one's going to see if they're better than player two.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. And you can also do PvE.
Which is, if we're going to have that in the game, I would prefer PvE. Yeah, that's my personal preference. Right. But yeah, you can do co-op and competitive. And
your PvE can be co-op.
Yeah.
Where everyone helps each other, or competitive, where we don't fight each other, but let's see who gets a better score. So Teal will go and attack this stage, and then I'll do the same thing. And where they're either gauged on, number of kills, time trials, time attacks.
Right, whatever.
Right. That's not PvP, but it's PvE competitive. So you have that umbrella of PvP, PvP, PvE co-op, PvE competitive. you're never going to get away from that. You don't have to have it in your game.
You don't have to have it in your game, but it's just something to consider.
Because it's always going to be there.
Yeah.
So, and the list that we just gave is by no means exhaustive. There's tons more. If you can think of anything, let us know in the comments on YouTube or pop a message to us on Discord.
Yeah.
Let us know your thoughts there. But now that we've talked about the different possible components, let's go ahead and go on a lower level here.
Oh, we're getting into the more technical side of things at this point, and these are things we want you to consider when you're building the online portion of your game.
Right.
And this is how to deal with them, I think, more than anything else. How to deal with these considerations.
Right. There are things that will come up that you want to consider, and you want to start getting in your head how you're going to troubleshoot them.
Yeah.
And not all of them are problems, but the first one definitely is.
And that's engine limitations.
Yeah.
Can your engine handle this component?
Right. It would be a really bad idea to try to do a co-op FPS, like a Call of Duty FPS, where everyone's members of a squad, and your engine can't handle that.
Yeah.
Now, when we say engine's handling it, we don't just mean can the engine handle the game itself. Because you can create a level where a soldier goes through a village shooting insurgents. You can do that.
Yeah.
That's, and you can design it and it runs just fine. And at certain points, different groups of enemies come out and different events occurs and the player has to react and you have wayfinding. And your engine may run that just fine. But the moment you introduce that online component where it has to sync up, where replication has to occur between player A and player B so they see the same thing at the same time, it creates an entirely different ball of earwax.
Yep, it sure does.
And you need to make sure that at base, your engine can handle that. Speaking of base.
Right. You ask yourself what kind of code bases are needed for the game.
Code bases are foundations to start at for different types of games. And if you try to use a code base, if you try to use a foundation for an offline turn-based RPG, and you decide about halfway through your project, wait, I want this to be a multiplayer turn-based RPG, which I've never seen before and would think is awesome. I would love to see that. But that's not the code base that you installed. That's not what you've been using.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
That's a problem, unfortunately. Yeah.
Code bases are also frameworks for anyone who's going, what's a code base? Same thing.
Right, same thing.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you all a question, and I want you all to consider this as a possibility. Do you need a network engineer? Do you need some kind of network designer?
Yeah.
If your project is big enough, the answer is yes. Having someone whose job it is to look at the networking component of your game, if your game has a notable online component, and I'm not talking about uploading your scores to a Steam leaderboard. I'm talking about interacting with other players in any capacity.
Right.
You probably want to hire a network engineer.
I would highly recommend that.
Yes. Because they're going to know the ins and outs of that game engine and what that game engine can and cannot do. But they're not the only one.
No, they're not. Nope. Guess what? You're going to need to do extensive testing
and
with how your engine will handle all this.
And you need to know your game engine as well as anyone else. As the design lead, you have to know every aspect of that game engine. You don't have to know the nuts and bolts of every little piece, but you have to know what it can and cannot do. Otherwise, as the design lead, you can't communicate that to the network engineer. And it's not the network engineer's fault if the lead developer doesn't communicate properly.
Yep.
It's one of the reasons why lead developers / quote-unquote game designers make the pay they do is because they are part project manager.
I would have to say so. Yeah,
they are.
Absolutely.
So the engine limitations are there.
Yes, they are.
And they're something you need to consider. And they're not the only limitations.
Let's go to the other side. Let's go to the player side. Okay, the hardware limitations that a player would have.
Yeah.
So the but I think of hardware limitations. I'm thinking about my computer. What is the minimum system requirements needed for me to run this game?
Right. And that's the player's.
That's the
PC.
Player's PC.
It's not going to be the same as the development PC. So the PC you use to develop your game is always going to be higher caliber with more RAM and more power than the game the user plays. They're going to be focused more on frame rate. You're focused more on crunching that game engine out. So don't use your dev PC as a metric for the hardware limitations of your online game.
Sure, and going back to a previous point, do a lot of testing.
A lot of testing.
So some developers have a what I call the cheap PC on the side, and they run the game through that lower level PC to see, does it work?
Does it work?
Can it play on this?
Right. And it's not just the client PC. There's also the network itself to consider. For example, we're running on a business fiber connection here. We are not the place to test networking for a game we design.
No.
We would have to go elsewhere or put a throttle on our network. That means make it run slower in order to test properly, because not everyone has a fiber connection.
No. And not everyone even has a wired connection. I mean,
some people are wireless.
Some people have satellite because of where they live.
Right, yeah. Wireless hotspot. Can a person with a wireless hotspot connect to your game and play any online component?
Yeah.
Or are they stuck on offline mode forever? These are things you need to test ahead of time. You don't need to be testing this after your game has gone gold and people are leaving you negative reviews.
Does
your game spin up a server? In other words, is the server client side, or is it a nebulous space like on AWS or something like that? If where's the server reside? And these are things that your network engineer will help you develop.
Yeah.
But then you want to stress test that server load. Is your server only handling one lobby of 100,000 users, or is it handling 100,000 users spread out over 25,000 lobbies of 4 people apiece? It depends.
Yeah.
The Phasmo servers, for example, those Phasmo servers handle a bunch of public servers and an even more number of private servers.
Yes, they do.
So is any of that client side, or is it all server side, or is it a hybrid? These are things you have to consider. You have to ask these questions prior to putting the online component, and if possible, prior to starting the game's development at all.
And it's interesting to note that Phasmophobia limits your individual server lobby to be 4 people.
Right.
It's a maximum of 4 people.
Right. So no matter whether it's a public server in which anyone can join or a private server that needs a room code, you can never have more than 4 people. That's a limitation built in for both gameplay and, I would assume, server.
I would assume that too.
The other game we're playing nowadays, 7 Days to Die, you can have up to 16 people per game world.
Right.
So that's a different replication. Replicating a game, syncing a game between 4 players is different between syncing a game to 16. So things to consider. So you're going to go through all of this mishmash stuff. What's the hardware? What's the engine limitations? And eventually you're going to answer those questions, and you're going to have online components. And that's fantastic, and that's wonderful. Who's going to play them?
So you need to be encouraging. Build some things into your game that encourages people to go online, to participate in that online community.
The game may be fun, but what about the online part? Is that fun?
Can players even access it?
Yeah.
So you want to give incentives for them to participate.
Yeah. Things that they would feel are, hey, you log in every day, and let's say it's a game where you're an adventurer. Okay, it's a fantasy RPG. You're in Adventure Town, and you go out and you adventure with your friends.
Yeah.
And every day that you log in, you build up a login point. And when you get a certain number of login points, you get a piece of furniture. That's when that's how you decorate your house. You can't buy the furniture. You could trade the furniture.
You could trade it. Right. Online marketplace.
Right. Online trading, but you get it. So that's an incentive. Hey, I want to decorate my house because right now all it has is a bed and a table with a stool with a shaky leg.
Yeah.
So I want something nicer, so I log in. That's an incentive. Another incentive. Can you think of any?
Another incentive would be, I would say, having a giveaway.
Yeah.
So if you're on the game for X number of hours, then you can automatically participate in this giveaway. of getting something really nice.
There you go. Some type of either in-game item or a boost or something like that.
Right.
What if, an offline game? Here's a good one. Actually, Phasmophobia we always go back to that one because they do a lot of things right. They have daily goals there. That's an incentive to play the online component. Right.
You complete 3 daily goals and you get extra experience points.
Yeah, and money for the store. Because that's the metrics of success in that game is experience and money.
So these are all incentives.
Yeah, incentivize them on the online part.
Now, let's keep this in mind. All these incentives and all this encouraging should not be required for game completion.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So show your players how they can participate, how they can be enriched, right? Enriched, their experience enriched, without requiring it to, it's not a completion thing.
Yeah, not a victory condition.
That's the word I'm looking for. It's not victory conditions.
Like the old White Knight Chronicles game for PS3 had the diorama for the avatar character, the player character, and all that was just extra goodies. It did absolutely nothing other than that in trophies.
Yeah.
It had in no way, shape, or form influenced your ability to finish the game with Leonard and company.
Exactly.
All you did was just do the diorama. So it wasn't enrichment. And I think also your player avatar could get insanely powerful with gear.
Yeah.
But that's all that was.
That's all it was just extra stuff.
Yeah.
You didn't need any of that to complete the game.
Right. So for those people who played White Knight Chronicles, and they just wanted to experience the story, they never had to touch the diorama.
Sure.
But for those who wanted that extra enrichment, they would. They would. So you're encouraging the player base.
You're encouraging them, and now let's take it a step further and let's fully engage them.
Yes.
So let's ask this question, how do your offline components connect to your online parts?
Right, exactly. How do they influence each other? Do they have to? No, but if they do, then they should integrate as seamless as possible.
Yeah.
For example, instead of having a trade menu, have a trade guild.
ESO did that very well.
Yes.
With the trade guilds.
Yeah.
It was you could join. There was some gatekeeping involved because it's a guild.
Right.
But once you join, you're in, and you can freely trade.
Yeah. So you didn't go to a random place and say, "I want to trade here." Click. Okay, this is here. So when someone gives a trade, they come back. Your character joined a guild. You were accepted. Like Teal said, there was some gatekeeping. You had to follow the rules. Some of them were like, if you aren't active within a certain number of days, you're automatically ejected from the guild. Stuff like that.
Yeah, things like that.
It was a guild. And your character would then be able to trade with other members of the guild, and some players became, in character, very wealthy.
Yes, some players decided to go a merchant route.
Yeah.
And this is what they did.
Yeah, that's what they did.
They were fully engaged in the game with the online part.
Yeah. The Phasmophobia's online component is literally just, here's the other investigators.
Yes.
So it's extremely seamless. To be fair, Phasmo was an online game before it had a single player component.
Yeah.
So, but here's a really good one too. The online component, and this is not so much a multiplayer thing. So we're going to go away from multiplayer for a second. Dragon Age Inquisition.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it had a multiplayer component, but it was crud. But the online component was the tapestry, which would allow you to import your world from Inquisition to whatever DQ Dragon Age 4 is, the A4.
Right.
So that's an online component. It's seamless because you're creating the story of your Inquisitor built off the story of your Warden and your Hawk.
Yes.
And this tapestry is the world tapestry. It's Thetis' story. And it's a seamless integration as you play. Just as you don't do anything. You don't go anywhere. You don't press any buttons.
Right.
As you play the game, your information is uploaded to your tapestry. And when you finish Dragon Age Inquisition, you can then go to your tapestry on BioWare's site and watch your story as if it was a tapestry weaved, by minstrels, and it's got beautiful pictures, and it's like, that's your story.
Yeah.
That's your Thetis story. So it doesn't always have to be a multiplayer piece, but it needs to integrate seamlessly.
It absolutely does. And another way we've mentioned before about engaging your players is having some online events.
Absolutely. Online events are very, very good. If your game has an online component and especially a multiplayer component where there's some kind of social network or lobby or something where players physically meet between whatever gameplay engagement.
Yeah.
An online event's fantastic. And it can be as awesome as like the various holidays in ESO.
Right.
And Final Fantasy XIV, they have holidays.
They have holidays.
And the places, the world spaces that are civilized are decorated for whatever.
Yeah, and they had games and contests and things like that.
Right. Or as small as the Phasmo lobby, for example, being changed for Halloween, for their anniversary, or for Christmas.
Yeah.
So you can go as big and epic or as small as you want, but those events create a sense of personalization.
They do. And that's so important for engagement.
Personal connections between yourself and your player are paramount to UX.
Yeah. So all these things we talked about, all these considerations of encouragement and engagement, they can extend your game's life.
Yes.
To be honest with you, these things can keep your players coming back.
Yes, and you want that as a game developer. Yeah, there's going to come a point where you as a developer go, okay, I'm done working on this game.
Yeah.
Everybody have fun. I'm going to move on. If you have an online component, especially if it's making some kind of revenue, you're probably going to stick around there as long as you can.
Sure.
But, for the most part, if your players keep coming back, your game is pretty damn successful.
Yes, it is.
Whatever metric of success you use, people are playing your game. So you need to ask that question. You need to write down all these other questions, but you need to write down, how can you keep your players coming back? Well,
yeah.
First thing you do is you listen.
Listen to your players' feedback.
Yeah.
This is paramount.
Yes.
We can think of many examples of games that didn't do that right.
Yeah, and fell apart. Some of them were indie, 1 or 2 developers. Some of them were AAA titles with massive studios.
Yeah.
And honestly, this piece of advice kind of just goes to everything we've ever taught. Listen to your players.
Yeah.
Player feedback is the most important thing. Caveat.
The caveat, though, is don't let that community take over.
No, they don't. And there are games where the communities have taken over. We're not going to complain about it here. We've bitched about that enough on our AMAs.
True.
But there are games that have been completely taken over by their communities. And while it's okay to have the community be a part of the game's development and life cycle and improvement, there comes a point where the developer has to say, this is my game.
Yeah.
So,
this is my game. This is my vision.
Right.
And stand your ground. Don't deviate from that.
Yeah.
Because, of course, what happens is your community takes over the game. You've lost control. And you're also losing all the other players who don't agree with the direction that your game is going in.
Yeah.
They signed up for your original vision, and now it's departing from that, and they're like, this is not the game I want to play, so they leave.
Because you started listening to what was likely a vocal minority.
Yeah.
Most communities that take over their games, statistically speaking, are a vocal minority.
Yeah.
So listen to feedback, implement feedback. But remember, it's your game. Now, let's talk about fixing stuff. Your online components are important, and you want to prioritize fixing them for the overall UX.
Yeah, because honestly, at the end of the day, you want your game to be accessible for everybody.
Yeah.
It needs to be. It needs to run.
Yeah.
It needs to run seamlessly.
It needs to run seamlessly. Now, don't ignore the offline component, especially if your game is primarily offline with an online component. Please do not ignore that offline component, because at the end of the day, if your base game fails, then the online portion isn't. So when we say prioritize fixing the online components for the UX, we're not saying prioritize online over offline. We're saying, when you're looking at the different online components that need to be fixed, if it is a part of the UX, if it contributes directly to the user experience, fix those first. Quality of life improvements are amazing at getting player retention and bringing players back. If your game has an optimization issue for something, optimize it.
Optimize it, please.
If your game has it so that, high-level players automatically take all the fun from low-level players, balance that shit.
Wow, yeah.
If it involves the UX, prioritize that.
Yeah.
Prioritize that.
Speaking about UXs, we've touched upon this recently, and I want to keep talking about this point, and that's protecting children.
Yes.
Because more and more kids are playing games, online games, and all of us can think of numerous examples of where things went wrong. And as a developer, part of your responsibility is safety.
Yes.
Safety for your players. And there are ways that have worked, that we've seen work, that you can protect minors.
Yes. For the people in the back, so that we're very clear, it is partially the developer's responsibility. While it is the parent's responsibility to know what their child is playing, it is the developer's responsibility to put in safety controls and be transparent.
Yes.
So make sure that when you are developing those online portions, you have in the back of your head, what happens if a kid logs on? First, should a kid log on? If your game is only for the adults, only for like people 16 or older, then you need to make sure that it's transparent, that's understood. Does your game have the ability to have a parental lock on it?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
I mean, you can implement gatekeeping controls.
Absolutely.
I've seen, inputting a birthday. I've also seen where a kid, there is a passcode that a parent has to input in order for the child to access the online components
of the game, right?
Right. So consider your different gatekeeping options.
Right. Consider having a place that separates minors from adults. Rec Room does that. Rec Room, if you are a child, you are put in child mode, and you can only be heard and hear people who are on your direct friends list, i.e. your parents and your friends.
Right.
And that has a measure of control over that as well. So, a child who logs in into Rec Room, that Rec Room identifies as a child is put in a small box of communication.
Right.
For their protection. So consider that. Can you have your game differentiate and separate? And for protective, maybe your game's online component, if they're a minor, they can only play with those on their Steam friend list.
That's true.
Like, for example. Okay, there you go. There's a measure of control. That's a gatekeep.
Another gatekeeping is to lock them out of certain parts of your game that are very adult in nature. So, for example, you built a town, and one of the buildings in your town is a
House of Ill Repute.
Yes, that's a nice way to put it. House of Ill Repute. Minors can't go in that building.
Yeah, to them it's boarded up. And you can also do a gore setting. So it's like really gory content if they're in minor mode. It's confetti and delicious caramel. I mean, it doesn't look as much blood. Yeah. It's like, it's more cartoony. It's thuds of smoke. Kind of like how the Super Nintendo Mortal Kombat was ridiculous.
Yes, that's actually a good example.
Off instead of blood.
Yeah.
But you can do that.
You can do that.
So, and again, it's your responsibility. So, we spent a little extra time on this as opposed to, other things like, develop your leaderboard for fair accountment, updating it every week, having your balancing be automatic based on levels and time played. I mean, all these little things that you're going to want to delve into that we've talked about in previous podcasts.
We have.
We kind of put that to the side for a second because if you're going to make a game that's online, you have got to think about children playing.
Yes, you do.
That is so important. You do not want to get the reputation of your game not being child-friendly.
Yeah, so there it is.
Yeah, so, I mean, now it's time for you guys to tell us what you think. So we're going to now take questions from our live audience.
If you've been watching, remember to use the podcast question feature in our chat.
Yeah, and, we could probably make an exhaustive list of other online considerations to think of. There's so much that goes into this.
And that's where I would encourage our listeners to post those.
Yeah.
Post them in the comments. You can even message us.
Yeah.
You can go onto our Discord and you can talk about it with everybody, with the community on our Discord.
What works for your game won't work for another person's. What works for our game won't work for your game, but the theory behind it, the concept of keeping the game safe, keeping the game fair, keeping the game accessible, engaging, that UX, that never changes.
No, that's a constant.
That's a constant. So, and I mean, it goes back to what we've been saying the entirety of Season 2.
Mm-hmm.
The UX is king. The user experience is king.
Yeah.
And if you're going to have your game be online, then that experience is king. You know. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions pop up. We'll give them a few minutes here. I'm really excited about the fact that we're almost done with Season 2. I'm really excited about next week. It's going to be a really good one. It's going to be a good way to end Season 2.
It is, and having gone through 2 seasons, I've got to say that I've learned a lot. About proper podcasting protocols.
Proper podcasting protocols. There.
Yeah.
And you know, we've also I don't want to say we've relearned and refreshed and revitalized topics that we haven't touched in game development in quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, I mean, nobody knows everything. So, like, for example, with online, this one right here, this topic right here, neither one of us have worked on anything like this in a while.
Not for a while.
The last time I touched anything that even touched online was years ago. So it was kind of cool to dive into this and say, oh yeah, we got to think about that. You know, we got to consider, oh shit, the game engine and the hardware, because they're not the same thing.
Yeah. So I guess my takeaway is always be open to learning.
Yes.
Learn new things.
Yes.
It keeps you fresh.
Yes, it keeps you fresh. Like fresh fully breeze.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like what's outside.
It is windy and fresh and very beautiful, and I can't wait to go jump out there and enjoy the day. And I'm not seeing any questions, so I think this is probably a good time to end it.
Okay.
If you guys do have questions, whether you're listening live or if you're listening on VOD, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, etc., drop us a comment. Let us know your thoughts. We do want to thank each and every one of you. Your listeners, you make DLC Not Included in Studio Blue fantastic. If you're listening to us live, thank you for listening. Lots of love. If you're listening to us on iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, etc., 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 we love you too. So join us next time for DLC Not Included. And remember,
anyone can give you the key, but you have to go through the door.